Hi, my name is Rebecca Bishop. I'm founder and president of Advocacy Q+. I wanted to take a few minutes to briefly explain our first primary research project to give an idea of exactly who we are as Advocacy Q+ and this type of scientific research we intend to engage in. So the initial first research project we plan on putting together is a project for the National Institute on Environmental Health Sciences for an R01 research project called Research in Action. For this assessment, what we aim to do as Advocacy Q+ is establish a primary novel methodology for directly integrating genomic data into equitable policy change. So Tim's correct. Exactly what does this mean? So our actual action outcome from this development of this novel methodology will be to influence FEMA disaster relief resource distributions post-natural disaster response. Our efforts will ensure that FEMA focuses their resources and efforts on minority communities that are experiencing higher rates of environmental risk factors and exposure rates that are contributing to accumulated cancer predisposition risks in the future. We view these cancer predisposition risks to these minority communities as avoidable burdens to families, communities, and the healthcare system as a whole. To assess the cancer predisposition risk link that we're trying to piece together through our genomic data in order to actually influence FEMA policy, it's important to understand that exact component that we're looking at. We will be evaluating known findings for higher rates of gastrointestinal cancers in the Black and African American community. These gastrointestinal cancers are at a rate of 20% or higher when compared to their white counterparts, with an even higher rate of morbidity in comparison. These gastrointestinal cancers are known to be influenced directly by environmental stressors as well. Also, there is a known gene that has a negative impact on the rate of cancer predisposition based on environmental stressor exposure. It's important to note that there is plenty of surrounding evidence within the genetics community for how environmental stressors do act in a negative way against genetic control. So our gene of interest that we will be using to assess this environmental stressor impact to cancer predisposition in the Black and African American communities will be through a gene known as mutl homolog 1, NTHL1. This gene has known documented impacts on the development of gastrointestinal cancers and from that being influenced by environmental stressor exposure. NTHL1 is very, very important in repairing DNA. So when DNA becomes damaged, as demonstrated below, NTHL1 actually comes in and helps facilitate for the repair to occur to that damaged DNA. So you can see why this gene and its behavior would be highly important in preventing against cancer predispositions and why exacerbating this gene through environmental stressor exposure would be bad. That's right, Tim. MTHL1 did fix the DNA damage. So to actually assess this DNA damage, our first primary methodology that we will use to develop this overall methodology will be to utilize saliva samples to test for biomarkers of environmental stress to MTLH1. And there are known protocols and methodologies for how to do so. So this isn't something we will be developing ourselves. Our experimental and control populations will be divided as such. Our experimental will have been impacted by natural disaster in South Carolina, and we will test within low-income and high-income communities across 4 different demographic variables, being income, sex, age, and then race and ethnicity. Our control population will assess both low and high income for these four demographic variables, but they will be sampled from an area of the state that has not been recently impacted by natural disaster. The second portion of our methodology will be to use topological assessment and comparisons. As an example, I've provided two different chart types that demonstrate what the output of a topological assessment actually looks like. These are heat maps that use correlation coefficients to actually test for significant clusters of interactions within the data. We will perform this topological heat map assessment on our MTL-H1 biomarker dataset to determine for significant interaction modules. And then we will use a dataset that's publicly available from the EPA to determine environmental health risk. And then we will use a dataset from FEMA for health risk index scores. We will use topological assessment independently for all three of these data sets and then test for comparison of significant interacting modules within those three data sets. The purpose of doing so would be to determine in an overlapped way where the highest risk for this biomarker of stressor to this gene, as well as the EPA and FEMA's assessment of where the highest risk actually lies within each of these data sets. We will then publish this data and then develop it into an action report to send to FEMA to actually mitigate how they respond to natural disasters based on these clustered findings in order to say with certainty that these are the areas and communities you should be focusing your relief efforts on first. Our third primary portion of this methodology will be an evaluation metric. So we will use three different evaluations consisting of two types to actually assess how well our action report influenced FEMA response relative to a natural disaster. We will do this through surveys. Our first survey will be delivered post our action report to actually assess how well was our action report received, was it interpretable from their ends, was it delivered in a way that they could actually implement it into their policies, things of that nature. The second survey we will send will be to FEMA post response to a natural disaster to actually assess real time how did our action report actually manipulate and modulate their response behaviors to a natural disaster. The final evaluation criteria that we will use to assess the success of our action report will be to once again perform topological analysis. We will do this once FEMA has released public data based on their natural disaster response after we have submitted our action report. The reason we will do this is to see if within their data, was there actually a change in the clustered modules that we identified? Do we see a change in the data that shows maybe now a new response pattern that could be further integrated into their relief resources that help further alleviate health disparities? So our expected outcomes for this entire research project is to get FEMA to refocus their efforts towards responding more rapidly and inclusively to minority communities. Ultimately, outside of just the action that actually modulates response patterns for FEMA, we are hoping to ultimately create a scalable methodology for applying genomic assessment directly into creating equitable policy change. The reason for developing this is so that we can then take this methodology and apply other genes, environmental stressors, and health disparity risks in unison to further create better equitable policy change in the future. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you being here with us on our page. Please check out our website, follow our newsletter, And keep in touch with us as we keep going. Stay tuned and watch our page as we make updates, as we actually manage to rapidly mobilize and put ourselves together and get these projects off the ground. And if there are any donors out there watching, we could really, really use your help in actually rapidly initiating these projects and developing true change for South Carolina that can last for years to come. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us. Please stay tuned.